Your indifference cost these men and women their most valuable commodity, time. It's the one thing they're running out of. This should be flipped. This hearing should be flipped. These men and women should be up on that stage, and Congress should be down here answering their questions as to why this is so damn hard and takes so damn long. And why, no matter what they get, something's always pulled back, and they got to come back. Mr. Johnson, you made a point earlier, and it was one that we have heard over and over again in these halls, and I couldn't help but to answer to it, which was, you said, look, you guys are obviously heroes, and 9/11 was a big deal, but, we have a lot of stuff here to do. And, we got to make sure there's money for a variety of disasters, hurricanes and tornadoes. But this wasn't a hurricane, and this wasn't a tornado. And by the way, that's your job anyway. We can't fund these programs, you can. Setting aside that no American in this country should face financial ruin because of a health issue. Certainly 9/11 first responders shouldn't have to decide whether to live or to have a place to live. And the idea that you can only give them 5 more years of the VCF because you're not quite sure what's going to happen 5 years from now, well, I can tell you, I'm pretty sure what's going to happen 5 years from now. More of these men and women are going to get sick, and they are going to die. And I am awfully tired of hearing that it's a 9/11 New York issue. Al-Qaeda didn't shout death to Tribeca. They attacked America, and these men and women, and their response to it is what brought our country back. It's what gave a reeling nation a solid foundation to stand back upon, to remind us of why this country is great, of why this country is worth fighting for, and you are ignoring them. And you can end it tomorrow. Why this bill isn't unanimous consent and a standalone issue is beyond my comprehension. And I have yet to hear a reasonable explanation for why. It'll get stuck in some transportation bill or some appropriations bill and get sent over to the Senate, where a certain someone from the Senate will use it as a political football to get themselves maybe another new import tax on petroleum.
I rise today to urge for the swift passage of the bipartisan legislation I am leading with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, known as the Never Forget the Heroes, permanent authorization of the September 11th Victims Compensation Fund Act. I'll never forget the images of the brave men and women running into danger to save lives during the September 11th terrorist attacks. I never had the privilege or honor of going to New York City prior to September 11th of 2001. But I'll never forget my first visit after September 11th, 2001, going to Ground Zero, watching the fire trucks, their flag, heading to Ground Zero to continue the work that had by then become absolutely emblazoned in the people of this country's mind. The work that they did wasn't just for those in Manhattan that suffered incredible loss, but the work they carried forward for our country. They became symbols of our security, symbols of our freedoms, symbols of our country's willingness, effort, and tenacity to fight back. This legislation would ensure that all 9/11 first responders and survivors who've been injured by the toxins at Ground Zero would receive their full compensation through the September 11th Victims Compensation Fund now and into the future, as more and more become ill with 9/11 related cancers. When I visited Ground Zero, I'll never forget that smell, the burning acrid odor. These men and women didn't just visit it once but time and time again to carry out the cleanup of Ground Zero. Unfortunately, thousands of first responders and survivors, including many who reside in my home state of Colorado, now suffer from illnesses and diseases from these toxins that they inhaled day after day after day in the recovery efforts at Ground Zero. It is unacceptable for this Congress to fail these heroes and their families. It is unacceptable to fail these families and the heroes of September 11th. There is no time to waste. As Congress debates this issue, more and more people are becoming ill, more and more people are suffering, and today people like Lou Alvarez came to Washington, D.C., postponing a chemotherapy treatment to advocate for his fellow heroes. The fund expires at the end of this year if we do not act. These men and women have already been forced to reduce their compensation. We've seen a reduction in their compensation to the 9/11 first responders due to the impending insolvency. Jon Stewart, a longtime advocate for the 9/11 responders, testified today before the House Judiciary Committee, expressing the urgency of making sure these first responders receive the care they deserve to receive. Talking to the members of the committee in the House about the need to act now because time is of the essence. He said that these men and women responded in 5 seconds. They did their jobs with courage, grace, tenacity, humility. 18 years later, it's time for Congress to do its job. And that's what I hope my colleagues will do our job. Pass this important bipartisan legislation, recognizing the service, the sacrifice of these great heroes of 9/11. Tomorrow, the House companion legislation will be marked up in the Judiciary Committee. Congress must do the right thing. The Senate must do our jobs. It must act on this legislation. I urge my colleagues to join this legislation, to co-sponsor the bill, to support this effort, to support the effort in the House and Senate to swiftly pass this legislation, to ensure these heroes receive the care they need, the care they deserve. We didn't know what was going to happen on September 11th. But for the thousands of people involved at Ground Zero, we know what will happen if Congress fails to act, and it's unacceptable. That's why I urge my colleagues to pass this important legislation, to do the right thing, to stand up for their fellow heroes who've served our country so well. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.